Support for WBFO and What's Next comes from our members and from Health Foundation for Western and Central New York, where racial and socioeconomic health equity are prioritized. Learn more about building healthier neighborhoods at hfwcny.org.
From Buffalo Toronto Public Media, this is What's Next, an hour dedicated to amplifying the voices of marginalized and underrepresented communities across Western New York and Southern Ontario.
We cannot erase, we cannot reform, we cannot make things better if we're uncomfortable having tough conversations,
Absolutely.
if we're uncomfortable talking about race.
What's Next carries forward our mission to engage in meaningful conversations about race, equity, and the shared concerns that deeply affect Buffalo's East Side and beyond.
Don't stop. Make those families part of your life. Their lives are part of yours. Don't stop.
Together, we dive into the real issues, striving for understanding, connection, and change.
In the suburban area, everywhere, we must work and teach our children.
Welcome to What's Next. Today, What's Next is at a remote location. I'm going to give you the specific address, 321 Humboldt Parkway. We are in a historic location, as a matter of fact, at 321 Humboldt Parkway. And in this particular case, unlike a lot of the other buildings on Humboldt Parkway, this particular structure at 321 was erected in 1961. We're going to get all into its history, its significance, and the plans ahead with Albert Chao. Albert, architect, artist, educator, tinkerer, thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And thanks for having into your living space right now. This is where you're actually living right now, but this, of course, was once upon a time the home and studio of Robert Traynham Coles, a very significant individual in the history of Buffalo. I'll let you start of a little tutorial on Robert Traynham Coles.
Yeah, so Robert Traynham Coles, he was born and raised in Buffalo. He lived in this neighborhood, and eventually, he went to school for architecture. He went to Hampton, then eventually University of Minnesota. Did a thesis he went to MIT for his graduate studies and did a thesis project that was in his hometown. It was for a community center, and so he was out there in Boston afterwards, working as an architect, and he gets a phone call. Hey, do you want to build your thesis project? And so in that process, he came back to Buffalo. He built his thesis project, and then also in that time started his architecture practice here. And so during that time, he's built a lot in Buffalo and beyond, actually. New York City, Atlanta, Rhode Island, various different places. And so, I did not know of Robert Traynham Coles. I was a student at UB, University of Buffalo, perpetual student, but I was a student there. Eventually came out with an architecture degree, an architecture and MFA, fine arts degree.
But you knew nothing about Robert Traynham Coles.
But I did not know who he was. I left Buffalo in 2011, worked in New York City, and came back in 2020 during the pandemic, and that was my first year teaching. And when I came back to live in this house. And so it's been, since then, pulling on the thread to learn more and more over time who he was about, what kind of projects he did, and also kind of vision what this space could be.
This space is fascinating, for sure. Just being inside it now and even locating it. We were talking about how I actually frequently drive right past this particular location, and I would never have noticed it because the way it was designed in 1961 was to, in essence, put its back to the highway, the Skagit Expressway that's right in front of this. It's right on the other side of the sidewalk from this structure. There's a significance to that.
Yeah, so I love bringing students here. I'm an adjunct instructor at University of Buffalo. And we are talking more about, the history of the Parkway system Olmsted Parkway system, and also how the highway kind of cuts through and destroyed that once beautiful tree-lined street. So what I love doing is starting the tour outside, where you look and observe all the other houses along the street, and you realize all porches face what was a parkway but now a highway. And so you actually feel that presence of the highway like deeply. And so when you walk in, he oriented his own porch. He knew the highway was coming in, so he oriented his porch to the backyard, to a tree-filled garden in the backyard. And when you walk by in the front, it's just a blank brick facade. Many people have just walked by wondering where the house is.
Right.
And so, why this house is special. This house is a prefab house. There's a lot of history in it. He started his architecture practice here. He lived here. But one big thing right from the beginning is, turning his back into infrastructure that was harmful. So I think in that spirit, we want to continue this act of resistance and resilience, and also reimagine what design could do in terms of protecting, but also opening up. We're in this backspace right now, and I think it really opens up into the backyard and makes people think about, possibilities and imaginations of what could be. So,
also, just to be clear, it's considered to be the only modernist structure on the east side, right? I mean, that's what we understand it to be. I mean, so we don't know every structure on the east side, of course, or a modernist house, right?
Modernist house.
Yeah.
Modernism can be a loaded term.
Sure. Somehow I feel I have the right person to talk about it.
But so, we'll probably say this, that, this house is a, quote, mid-century modern house, and has that sort of feel to it as well. But then, if we talk about him and his practice and modernism in general, if he was a Black architect, he began his practice here. How did he, take as a prefab system, take some of the elements and put a different spin on it? So this is a flat roof, for example. The framing of the views, he was very intentional in framing the backyard. But again, the initial impetus is like a resistance to incoming infrastructure, And so he practiced here. So you can actually, what's interesting, I think, about him is that he built much, in the 1960s and beyond, into the 2000s. And you can see the evolution of his form, his buildings, how they talk to one another. Some of them are kitty-cornered to one another. So he's actually having a conversation back and forth between the two buildings.
Conversation, yeah.
Yeah, so like one of them, the YMCA and the Jesse Nash Health Center. The Jesse Nash Health Center came first. The YMCA came later. And there's a larger legacy of YMCA by Black architects in Buffalo. But before that, I always wondered why part of the building was turned the way it was. And it's because the entrance actually looks back onto the Jesse Nash Health Center.
Wow.
So, once we start noticing these little moves that he made, it's kind of curious.
Right.
It's kind of nice. And so, if we talk about modernism, I think we can talk about this thing as an evolving, his form as evolving. And right now, we're hoping to also be able to do more studies of how it evolved, more interpretation. And that's part of the research agenda that we also have. So,
because what we're talking about here, I mean, we've kicked around a couple of the simple names, but I like Coles House Project, with the idea that while on one side, yes, keeping this structure in place and keeping it, standing for years to come is a great thing, but there's an expanded mission to that exists well beyond this house. And I think it kind of reflects what you were just talking about a little bit with Coles, the evolution of his thinking. I mean, in so many ways, he was well before his time in 1961, showing his contempt for this highway infrastructure that, of course, we've had dozens of shows talking about the Kensington and the Scajaquada and the possibilities of restoring the Humboldt Parkway. So let's get into just that idea of where maybe these conversations, where this mission could go.
Yeah, so Coles House Project. First and foremost, we want to restore the house. You think it's a gem. Much can be talked about this house, and we can spread the word about the architecture and the significance of the building. But at the same time, to turn it into a community space. So inviting the public in, having exhibitions, talks, lectures, workshops, making this place used, and just having it a gathering space, throwing parties, inviting the public in, and then I think the last arm of this is that we really want to think about how architecture and planning and these processes and organizing can be part of engaging the community again. So we want to center community-driven design and advocate for projects that give back or are integrated into the community. Right now, the simple act of repairing your roof, for example, can help maintain a neighborhood, for example. What's interesting also is that Hamlin Park is a historic district. And so one part of that is that there are not as many vacant lots in this area. Why is this place a historic district? Coles put in the application to turn this into a historic district. So there's a lot of layers. How can designers and architects advocate for communities? And we want to be a part of that. This last arm, we want to set up a form of neighborhood design center that can be that advocate. But first and foremost, to listen to the community, talk to them, invite them in, think about the possible potentials for creative new imaginings that we can be a part of.
We're talking with Albert Chao this morning, and we are on location with What's Next at 321 Humboldt Parkway, the former home and studio of architect Robert Traynham Coles, and is now part of what's being called Coles House Project, which we're just kind of just touching upon here as we talk with Albert Chao. Albert, let's maybe get a little into design / architecture and, for lack of a better term, social justice. What do we understand, for any kind of examples you could offer of how perhaps people of color have been left out to a certain extent of the architectural and design process, and maybe those types of the impacts that may have come from that?
Yeah. The most egregious one here, right, is that this used to be a parkway. And so, and there are a lot of people now fighting, and reimagining what this highway could be. And so, where are these highways placed? And this is not just specific to Buffalo, this is throughout the United States. They're typically placed through marginalized communities that, have not been able to put up the resistance or been given the tools or have access to institutional and structural systems that prevent folks from actually organizing. So that's the most egregious one. Investments / disinvestment, intentional in communities. There's also developer-driven work that have particular agendas and have particular pro formas, and that harm particular neighborhoods. And I think knowing, forming a collective of individuals that know these processes, knows how things get built, I think we can, start forming and working with communities to, put up resistance to that, but also imagine how can, we work with developers to actually advocate for the community. I think there could be moments where, interests can align, but we need, in those instances, we can provide that conduit to provide our demands and to see if we can work together on these things.
I could probably put you on the spot a few times during this conversation, but you just were scampering by some really interesting subject matter. The need for housing is obvious, here, everywhere in the United States, well, and beyond, obviously. And you brought it up, the development community, for lack of a better term, but obviously it's a, generally speaking, profit-driven, effort. Back to we were talking about conversations and communities getting involved. Let's talk about the possibilities of that process, where we need new housing, got to have housing. Developers are probably more than willing to find new opportunities for housing, but maybe not necessarily worried about making that housing affordable. How can those interests align? You're saying it like that, and I'm kind of jumping ahead here a little bit and hoping that there's an answer to this question. Yeah, it's a good answer. Yeah.
I mean, I worked in architecture for about 10, 11 years, and part of this is within architects' wheelhouse. Part of it is also learning from urban planners, researchers. UB, there are researchers at UB have done amazing work. There are other organizations. So first, to talk to these people. I don't have all the answers.
Right.
But at the same time, there are models of like co-op housing, and also just gathering and finding investments within these neighborhoods. There are a lot of vacant lots, for example. How can we, but there are also, when we look at the vacant lots, we're like, why don't we just build there? There are zoning restrictions. There are like a lot of other knowledge that is embedded within the practice of architecture that, I think as a group we can provide and we can think about and we can advocate for. So I think, trying to find where we can fit in and work with others and not just work with others to build more equitably.
Sure. Do you see examples of, if not necessarily locally, nationally, or perhaps even internationally?
Examples
of these successful partnerships that are bringing about desired results.
I mean, I'm blanking a little bit, but there are examples.
Well, let me lead you into the next question, which was coming up afterwards. So then, who needs to take the lead on that? How does that get driven to bring all of those disparate parties together?
So I'm going to answer both questions.
Please do.
Because so community design centers, neighborhood design centers are not limited. There's a rich history of these organizations. I think Rochester has one, and there's many other cities that used to have one or have one now in different forms. And I think what it allows is for a forum for the community to come in, bring their concerns, bring their dreams, bring their asks, and then to start building that sort of trust. That's the first thing. I think the space is an intimate space to be able to bring and have those conversations. And so there's a rich history of that. At some point we're like, we're inventing this thing. Or actually, we're actually learning from the past so that we can build towards the future. Coles also designed or was part of these, design centers, and when he started his practice as well. So again, looking to the past, thinking about how we can create this sustainably now. So our next phase, we have a strategic plan going. One of our major efforts is to think about a neighborhood design center that can advocate for the community. The challenges are, how do we fund this? How do we support this work? But also, but I think as important is, how do we build that trust? I am not from this neighborhood. I did not grow up here. I'm a first generation Chinese American born in New York City. So, I'm right now learning about and going to meetings and trying to show up first before thinking about, what kind of projects we could do together, what kind of needs are there. I hope that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I was asking, as you were talking about terming yourself somewhat as an outsider, not really. You were at the University of Buffalo for several years. You've come back here and now into this neighborhood. So, yeah, but I'm interested in what you're seeing then. Are you seeing an energy, for lack of a better term, or just people showing up that you're sensing that this is all ready to happen? This type of cooperation and conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I'm showing up now, and even if you're within the vicinity, how you show up, I think also matters. But there is an energy now, I think. There are other organizations that are thinking through these structural issues, financing, what kind of nonprofits have been forming up. But I think, if we look back at history, there are many other organizations that have been, we're doing a lot of this work. So, how do we draw on that history and that energy and also tackle the things that we want to engage with now? 514 was one thing that really, drove home some of the, systemic issues, but again, it's just systemic. So not only is it a tragedy, but there's larger reasons why, the grocery store is where it is and why it was targeted. So how do we think about some of the larger issues beyond just, one building here, one building there? So
I appreciate you mentioning 514, of course, obviously, for sure. At the same time, I'll ask you kind of a hypothetical question. It's 2025, and right now this is a parkway out here. This is the parkway that was designed for the most part by Olmsted, and an application comes in to build a highway on this parkway. How would you think the community would respond to that today?
It's
hard to imagine that, but is there that kind of consciousness now where every project that gets, there's a dollar figure and it's going to be jobs? Maybe not. No, people are going to look at it differently.
I think so. It'd be hard to imagine that they would ever do this. But, what are the systemic things that are being done to disinvest and are designed to disinvest and, profit from disinvestment? So, I think that's such a clear, gash, yet there are the systems are in place are the ones that, keep wages where they are, lack of public spaces, lack of, trees, for example, things like that are accumulate over time, and vacant lots, for example, and care and communal care. And so these are things that that's the outright gash, but there are other things that are, under the surface that are harder to pinpoint, that are as destructive, if not even more. And so this is just a symptom of all these different things. So the task is pretty challenging, I think. But first, I think hopefully we need to organize, and we as in the Coles House Project, and to organize with the community. And so first part is to bring people into the house and welcome them in.
And we're very pleased to be welcomed into this house this morning on What's Next. That's where we're at, 321 Humboldt Parkway. This was designed and the home of Robert Traynham Coles, the Buffalo advocate architect who is responsible for many structures here in the city of Buffalo, and it is also now, I guess, the object or the subject of the Coles House Project. We'll get back into a little bit more of that and other issues as well as we continue with our conversation with Albert Chao. This is What's Next on WBFO.
Did you know that Buffalo Toronto Public Media produces shows that earned New York Emmy nominations and awards, Webby Awards, Telly Awards, GLAAD nominations, and New York State Broadcaster Association Awards? Check out our award-winning productions like Compact Science, Compact History, Let's Go, Brave Spaces, Kleinhand's Gift to Buffalo, and much more on the Buffalo Toronto Public Media YouTube channel, or visit WNED.org. This is public media.
You're listening to What's Next, our place to discuss the important issues of our communities of Western New York and Southern Ontario. We want to hear from you. Click on the Talk to Us option in the WBFO app, and we'll work to get your questions or comments on the air. Do you have a story or concern that we should be addressing? Email us using what'snext@wbfo.org. Together, we'll have the conversations that are needed. This is WBFO, your NPR station.
Welcome back to What's Next. We're remote today at 321 Humboldt Parkway. Talking about the Coles House Project. We've already talked a little bit about Robert Traynham Coles, and most certainly would be worthwhile to maybe circle back to him to a certain extent. But we're with Albert Chao, who is among those trying to lead their way into this Coles House Project. And one of the things, as I was looking into this a little bit, I mean, some of your background and some of the topics that were coming up. Spatial justice is a term that I came across, which just intrigued me to a certain extent. Tell me what you can about spatial justice.
Yeah. So spatial justice, and I'm going to also throw out design justice. So spatial justice is, the impacts that physical space can have on us. So the most obvious one is the highway, for example, here. But it can also be access to goods, access to amenities, access to grocery stores, for example. So spatial justice is not just this, huge gash in here, but it can be larger systemic things. Why do we not invest in particular areas, for example? Or why do we see only a particular type of investment in particular areas? Design justice, I think, tries to understand this, and then reimagine or imagine possible futures, potentials, possibilities. And for me, design justice, centered people within neighborhoods and the community that is there. And so in that imagination, we can build together for a better community, but then also it affects the city completely as well. And so we're trying to think through how we can model these processes.
When you look around the city of Buffalo, or anywhere in Western New York, we throw that term out there, spatial justice. You do see things that it's egregious. How did this ever come about? I mean, we keep on talking about the highway and what is now the Skidacco Expressway, where it intersects with the Kensington Expressway, and that's where we're located right now. But are there other things like, wow, here's something that when I first saw this, and the more I can contemplate it, this was just a total misnomer. It was unjust in the way it's turned out. How about that?
Yeah, and a lot of this is built on historic injustices.
Sure.
So obvious ones are like redlining, infrastructure, attempts or veiled attempts, urban renewal plans, and then trying to tackle that with other plans like model cities program. And the reason why I throw these out is because Buffalo was designed for millions. It was in its heyday. It had its moment, and yet with the eventual decline, and it had its heyday. So you have these amazing structures, Guarantee Building, Martin House, all these different things. During its decline, we don't have as many structures, but it's interesting. What do we study? We do study the Guarantee Building, architecture, Martin House, but Coles built extensively, in the 60s and on, and so it's like these are also buildings that we can study, not only for its architectural significance, but also for, how do you build within at that time limited means? How do you reimagine these spaces? And so you can trace some of his projects in attempts to reimagine, a community center, to imagine a health center. The Jesse Nash Health Center, I've learned through research and through teaching, working with students, them teaching me that it was a Model Cities program building where they were trying to bring together disparate health services into one building, which is why when you look at it, you see four different forms coming together. So he's trying to architecturalize that as well.
It's interesting. Yeah.
I might have meandered a little bit.
No, that's good. Well, it does bring up Robert Traynham Coles, though. I mean, and it's worth exploring. It's interesting to hear your journey as an architecture student at the University of Buffalo. Here for 10 years, you leave, you come back, and that's when you heard about Robert Traynham Coles.
Yeah.
And just to hear you kind of talking about the Nash clinic, the Latin Nash Center, that you're seeing these. I guess I'll call them subtleties. Maybe from your perspective, someone who studies architecture, they're not all that subtle at all. I mean, what else do you see in his work?
Yeah. So if you kind of trace, I see a formalist.
Okay.
So you look at this house, it's 2 blocks, right? And there's a hyphen that connects it to. Some of his other projects are, very formal, but as he's developed, the Meriwether Library is probably one thing that he envisioned it as, a series of village. He went to Africa and considered the villages and how people meandered through them. And so the resultant form is still very formal, but it creates a different sort of communal space within it. And I've talked to the librarian there, the branch manager. He's amazing, but he talks about how the space is used. It gets, I think, an average. I don't recall all the numbers, but I think it gets an average, book, people taking out books. But the foot traffic is unparalleled to any of the other libraries except for the central one.
Wow.
And so it just goes to show how much that is actually being used and how much that is being... I've been there where, the hallways are just filled with
Sure, me too.
So, which is pretty amazing when you think about all the different structures. What I would love eventually is to, and we have sort of done this, is to take a tour of all his different buildings, go and see how it's transformed his style has transformed over the decades he's practiced. And what's interesting to me is that, again, I'm not the first person to do this. There was a gentleman here that we had invited for an open house, and he was kind of smiling, but he was like, I led a tour centered around Coles projects in Buffalo, and other people have imagined these things too, and so hopefully we can kind of continue that energy.
And you see that growth. You see growth in his work as you maybe have gone through these different structures.
Yeah, I probably am thinking too much about them.
That's all right.
But I see the growth. I also see some of the limitations.
Limitations, what? Because of the resources available, or
the resources available. But he made them work in the capacity he could. And I think these are all stories I've been told by others. He was challenged by budgets. These are many of them are public buildings. Many of them have limited budgets. So you don't see more of the flash, but I think in his own way there was a subtle movements that are pretty great. For example, you walk along the street, you see a brick wall,
mm-hmm.
and that's you. But then once you enter the house, it opens up. The glass is very intentional in bringing you to the backyard, and so when you look at some of these other buildings, it's not. You look at the outside and they're a little bit more blank. They're a little bit more austere, but when you walk in, they open up. The Merriweather Library is probably one of the best versions of this. Like the skylights are pretty fantastic. So that's what I've been trying to learn and also learn with students. Bring students into these projects so that we can learn together. It's a collective project. So.
It's nice to talk about him, though, because, like you said, as an architecture student, not all necessarily familiar with his work. His work stands the test of time? I mean, that's a simple statement, but yeah.
Maybe this would be a segue into another. Standing the test of time also requires maintenance.
Right.
And care and an understanding. So there's a larger project happening now, National Trust for Historic Preservation with the Getty Foundation, conserving Black modernism. They have a grant out, and an oversimplification is that many of these buildings are either torn down or bought by developers, or for lack of maintenance, unable to upkeep. And so they have set aside funding for this. And so this is the second year. Last year was the second year they launched this program. And 8 projects got awarded nationally. 2 of the projects are in Buffalo, and 2 of them are Coles projects. And so one of them is this house, and the other one is the JFK Recreation Center.
Wow.
And so, getting to be able to keep these buildings open, you have to maintain them. And how do we, and develop a plan? It's not only, dusting off the roof, but it's also like, how do we envision these spaces being used? What are the potentials to add to these buildings, to uplift some of the services that are already there. So standing the test of time requires more than just like being amazing.
Being
structures.
brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, and you are a living example of it. I mean, you live inside this house at 321 Humboldt Parkway. It's got a flat roof, and you kind of blew it out. You're like, oh, you got to dust the roof, but you're maintaining this roof a flat roof.
Yeah.
Here in the winter in Buffalo.
Yeah, so I don't go on the roof in the winter. I think insurance would be, but clearing the gutters. There was a leak. Talking to the roofer to fix whatever was there, the different options. Nerding out about roofing details. Bitumen roof versus liquid applied roofing membrane. That's for the architecture nerds. And so it is about care. And then another thing is like, not only of the house, but the landscape as well. There's snow right now, but this is actually a pebbled garden walkway, which also requires a tremendous amount of weeding.
Oh, really?
And so
I'll mark that off as something I'm not going to do in my house. But sorry.
Yeah, maybe a small section.
Yeah, maybe.
But as we think about the future of the house, how do we think about care, not only of the house, of the landscape, as a starter? And I think that can be emblematic of how do we think about care in a more general sense in the community. In architectural practice, how do we support a next generation of architects that can engage in these issues that are coming up again. So, yeah.
And just one other feature, I mentioned the roof here at 321. The basement is very different as well.
Yeah.
And it leaves a really unique feature in the backyard.
Yeah. So this is a prefab house. One of the elements, back in the day, I think one of the first models was like $10,000 for a house, which I found out is actually maybe close to $300,000. So it's still, if we can make it more affordable. But so it's only half sunken in so that you don't have to invest in, a full foundation for a basement. But what it allows is that in the back over here, you have terrace steps. And what is kind of amazing, so Omar Khan and Laura Garofalo were, the first stewards after Coles. If you look at the steps, it used to be steps all the way across. It was Omar and Laura who introduced, how about we have seating in the middle? And this was when Coles was still here with us. And Coles was like, oh, great. And so you actually see, you take for granted this is a small design detail, but like these are the sensitive design details that I think hopefully we can continue on when we're doing our strategic rethinking of the house. The Conserving Black Modernism grant will help us in that process.
Hopefully our listeners will be able to come over here in some time and see all about the Coles House project. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we come back. We're here at 321 Humboldt Parkway, the former home and studio of Robert Traynham Coles, now occupied by Albert Chao, who's helping to lead the Coles House project. We'll take a time out, come back with our final moments here on What's Next. This is What's Next on WBFO.
Celebrate the 50th anniversary season of Austin City Limits. Don't miss remarkable performances from Gary Clark Jr., Black Pumas, Brittany Howard, and more. Watch every Monday at 10 p.m. on WNED PBS.
You're listening to What's Next, our place to discuss the important issues of our communities of Western New York and Southern Ontario. We want to hear from you. Click on the Talk to Us option in the WBFO app, and we will work to get your questions or comments on the air. Do you have a story or concern that we should be addressing? Email us using whatsnext@wbfo.org. Together, we'll have the conversations that are needed. This is WBFO, your NPR station.
What's Next is over on Humboldt Parkway today. This is so exciting to go out on these remote adventures. We're at 321 Humboldt Parkway. It is the former home and studio of architect Robert Traynham Coles, and with us, Albert Chao, who is leading the Coles House project. I kind of led into it, and I saw you get all excited about inviting our listeners over to see this space, which is it's a wonderful space for sure. So let's get into that part of this project, that community engagement project, trying to make this space not so much a museum, but an active living space.
Yeah. So we've hosted multiple events. So again, I've been here since 2020. This was actually a safe haven during the pandemic. You know, professors would be in the back area gathering. And because it was open air and it was, we could socially distance. And I think there's a history of people already gathering here. This space just kind of engenders a sort of atmosphere. But what we're hoping and what we've been doing is holding open houses. Community can come in to see the before and hopefully the after. We have had an exhibition / architecture studio that I taught last spring at University of Buffalo. And so there were, students here, but architects, practitioners who looked at the work, gave feedback, critiques. There was many reviewers, 4 of which had worked for Coles.
Oh.
So making a space to bring back the gang together and to like really think about, and trade stories, talk about, what I was here and someone was like, my desk was right there. And I was like, oh, wait, what? Like, can you tell me? And then somebody else was like, I think I built this part of the model. Like, did you build this part of the model? Like, so to have that history, to bring that back and to create that energy here. So that's part of it. And the open houses are open to everyone, and especially, we want to bring in, our neighbors, Hammond Park, first, and then, or not first, but like, as part of this, reaching out. And we are also hoping for some exhibitions we have planned that think about, Black homes, for example. We have exhibitions that are in the works that can kind of illuminate not only, some of the issues that we're facing, but like imaginations of like what people are doing. So I'm excited to have some of those, maybe some workshops for discussions and more gatherings here.
You mentioned the exhibition about Black homes, and that most certainly intrigued me. So I mean, maybe kind of like in the developing stages or embryonic stages of it, but what can you tell me about that at this stage?
We are organizing with, it's still in the developing stages. But,
sure.
How do we think about architecture not with a capital A? This is a unique house, right? But homes that have been, are places for organizing, are places of welcoming, are places of resilience and resistance. So hopefully in August/September, we'll have more details about that. But it is a bit of organizing to bring this all together. So
the concept is still being built to a certain extent. Still being designed. Might be even better way to describe it.
It's actually designed. Well, no, it's not designed yet. We have a former employee of Mr. Coles, Charles Davis. He teaches at UT Austin.
Okay.
He also was born and raised in Buffalo. and he used to teach at Buffalo as well. And he had an exhibition, Black Homes as Public Art. And so our ambition is to bring that exhibition here, transform it to this particular space, because it's very different than a gallery space. And so what this kind of helps do is to not only look again at the past, but then reimagine what this space is, as one of the homes as part of this. There's multiple layers to this, which is exciting.
Sure, absolutely, and we're just kind of peeling back a few of those layers as we speak. So, and again, the idea of the public being invited. How can the public stay attached in some way? Is there a way to do that here?
We have a website.
Okay.
We have social media, Instagram. We have a Facebook and LinkedIn page. We'll blast it out, and we're hoping to blast them out soon. So
Coles House Project. What is that? What you be looking for online? Yeah.
ColesHouseProject.org.
Right.
So.
Right. Wow. I'll tell you what. It's an exciting concept. I mean, I guess we probably already know it, but I mean, Coles would probably be pretty pleased to know that his space is centering and maybe leading to some connections with a community that sometimes is overlooked and not given its credence.
Yeah, I'm talking to multiple people. He did have visions of. He was always engaged, and especially in the architecture and design world, and also in the community. But I think there were people that I've never met him, so Dad told me that, he had thought about this space as a community space, or transforming it into a community space. I'm not sure this would be the exact version, but we're learning and we're growing. So.
And you're having a talk show right in the middle of the space. So again, it's finding its all new ways, and it's adapting it as it goes along. I kind of touched about this a little bit more, but maybe we can kind of finish up our conversation. Not just of the Coles House project, maybe being, if not at the center, but most certainly a part of a spirited energy here in the city. I always like to ask people how hopeful they are, and I think since you're living here and you're pushing this, you're hopeful. But what about that? I mean, the hope for what this community can become. What do you see? What do you think?
Yeah, hopeful. Multiple answers to this probably. When I bring people in, students, neighbors, you just see them light up, and so there is and then you see people start talking about the space, and eventually about the neighborhood and their own porches and their own houses that they have been investing in for so much time. So there's that aspect of it, and I think looking to particular building communities. So architecture, design students, specifically bringing them here to think about how they can practice, they can be architects, they can be designers. Who are they working with/for? So I think these are new imaginations that I'm hopeful that this house can carry that sort of spirit.
Do you feel the energy though of this house has the chops to do that?
I think so, and then I think they're going to be different waves. So it's not what is kind of amazing about homes, I think, is that or a house or your own space is that it is also a moment to rest and mill about and clean and maintain, and it's those moments to recharge from events that are happening or just from work. I think that is as important as the recharging the hope, I guess.
Sure. Yeah, I can certainly appreciate that concept of trying to recharge your hope these days, that's for sure. Albert Chao has been our guest here on What's Next. Really a fascinating conversation, and of course, sharing the space with us. Really a privilege. Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming by.
Yes. Looking forward to hearing what else is happening down the line with the Coles House project. Just if you're tuning in right now, I advise you to do a Google search for 321 Humboldt Parkway and then drive by really slowly, because you can miss it the way this is structured. If you weren't at the beginning of our conversation, Robert Traynham Coles turned this property literally with its back to the highway, that it is right through this neighborhood here. Again, Albert Chao, thank you so very much for being with us on What's Next.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
This has been What's Next on WBFO.
Support for WBFO and What's Next comes from our members and from Health Foundation for Western and Central New York, where racial and socioeconomic health equity are prioritized. Learn more about building healthier neighborhoods at hfwcny.org.